Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. From the Arcadian Court in downtown Toronto, welcome to the season opener of the 112th season of the Empire Club of Canada. 112 years of history, of bringing the most important public figures and issues to the Canadian public, from Gandhi to Churchill, from Ronald Reagan to screen icon Audrey Hepburn. There's been so many names, almost everybody ends up stopping at the Empire Club of Canada eventually. And we're very proud of the fact that we've continued to bring these issues to the Canadian public from the dawn of the 20th century until today. So for those of you who are joining us through either our webcast or our podcast or on television through Rogers Cable, welcome to this meeting. Before our distinguished speaker is introduced today, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our head table guests. I'd ask that each guest rise for a brief moment and then be seated as your name is called. And I'd ask that the audience please refrain from applauding until all of the head table guests have been introduced. So from the audience's far right, Ms. Karen Peters, our bookkeeper at the Empire Club of Canada, who we honor today for her many, many years of service and for, quite frankly, keeping us on the straight and narrow. Thank you, Karen. Councillor Norm Kelly, Councillor City of Toronto, Ward 40, Scarborough, Agincourt. Welcome, Councillor. Mr. Saad Rafi, Chief Executive Officer, who we saw a lot of recently and in great successful terms. Chief Executive Officer, Toronto 2015 Parapan Am Games. Welcome. Mr. Marcel Aubu, the President of the Canadian Olympic Association. Welcome, Marcel. From the audience's far left, Mr. John Campion, Partner at Fasken Martineau and a past President of the Empire Club of Canada. Nice to have you with us. Jeff Wilson, the President and Chief Executive Officer of Ports Toronto and a Director of the Empire Club of Canada, and the Honourable David Peterson, Chairman of the Toronto 2015 Parapan Am Games, who will be introduced more fully in a few moments. My name is Gordon McIver. I'm the Executive Director of the National Executive Forum on Public Property and your host today. Ladies and gentlemen, your head table. I'd also like to acknowledge the presence in our live audience today of some past presidents of the Empire Club of Canada, notably Noble Chamar. Noble, nice to have you with us. Peter Hermant. Peter Hermant, could you stand and be recognized? Welcome, Peter. Nice to have you. Nona MacDonald. Nona, wonderful to have you with us today. And as we have already introduced at our head table, John Campion. John, nice to have you with us. We're also honored to have with us today the President of the Toronto Blue Jays, Paul Beeston, the former Minister of International Trade, the Honourable Jim Peterson, and the former President of the University of Toronto, David Naylor. David. So we start our season off this year with a topic that was, is, and will be of extreme interest to all Torontonians and Canadians, and that is how Toronto presents itself to the world, as most recently witnessed through the 17th Pan Am Games, which of course were held 2 short months ago in our great city. Our guest today was the chair of this extraordinarily successful event in the city's history and is here with us today to address that topic and to maybe give us a hint on what that could mean for the city going forward. He witnessed throughout his leadership role with the Games a population that literally evolved from an attitude of indifference and somewhat jaded annoyance at traffic issues to a united, patriotic, and wildly enthusiastic populace that couldn't get enough of these athletic competitions. Now, if the mere success of our Canadian athletes was the change agent, we as a city, of course, would be hard-pressed to explain the perennial success of our beloved local hockey team. So there's something more than just success that happens in selling the Pan Am Games. Perhaps it's a coming of age of one of the world's truly great cities, a pride in telling our stories to the world. And that's what we're looking forward to hearing about today from our guest speaker. Well, any Torontonian could tell you, of course, that Mr. Peterson was the premier of our province in the last half of the 1980s. Few realize the enormous contributions that he's made to industry, the arts, healthcare, and ensuring that matters of public importance are debated and better understood by the citizens of Ontario. His biography reads like what the French would call a roman fleuve, and to list them all would in fact take us to the end of this lunch. We will highlight, however, that he is the chairman of the Toronto law firm Cassels, Brox and Blackwell LLP, where he practices corporate and commercial law, as well as being Chancellor Emeritus of the University of Toronto, a director of St. Michael's Hospital Foundation, Rogers Communications, Inc., Franco Nevada Corporation, and Ivanhoe Cambridge. We'd also be remiss to not remind you that he was the founding chairman of the Toronto Raptors Basketball Club, Inc., and Chapters, Inc. In fact, Mr. Peterson has been a director of over 30 public and private companies in Canada. And if that were not enough, he's a senior fellow at Massey College, a fellow at McLaughlin College, and executive in residence at the Rotman School of Management. Mr. Peterson was called to the bar in Ontario in 1969 after completing studies at the University of Western Ontario, the University of Toronto, and the Université de Caen in France. He was appointed to Queen's Counsel in 1980 and was appointed by Her Majesty to the Privy Council in 1992. There ensued many, many other honours, including several honorary doctorates and special awards and honours from the government of France. And if that all sounds exhausting to you, let me assure you that I've only touched on a few of his many, many achievements. We're delighted that he's agreed to open our 2015 season and to talk to us about the significance of this past summer for the city and what that may mean for the future. So, ladies and gentlemen, would you please join me in welcoming the opening speaker of our 112th consecutive year at the Empire Club of Canada, the Honourable David R. Peterson.
With an introduction like that, I am bound to disappoint. Listen to this. You try this and put yourself in this place. Gandhi, Churchill, and Peterson. I'm getting off the stage right now, Gord, before I embarrass myself. But let me just say, thanks to the Empire Club for inviting me today, and thank you all for being here. There's so many people I look around this room who helped make this summer such a great success. And this is the first chance, roughly a month after the close of the games, to give a, shall we say, a public accounting, to stand up and say where we were, how, as we look back, and also as we look forward. Let me just say that the Pan Am Games were the largest event ever staged in Toronto and the GTA area. And there is probably no event in the history of Toronto that has attracted more attention. A little bit negative and some positive. But it was wonderful to witness the transformation in attitude towards the Games. And very quickly, one could see in this city apprehension turning to awe and cynicism turning to optimism. And maybe that was the chief legacy. Let me take you back to 2008, 2009. If you mentioned the Pan Am Games, it was a big yawn. Only 15% of the people had ever even heard of the Pan Am Games, an unaided awareness. And if you ask people if they want them, they say, what are they, and why would we, and who cares? There was no clamoring for the Pan Am Games. But the political leadership of the day at the provincial level, it was Dalton McGuinty, came to the conclusion that the Pan Am Games could serve not just Toronto, but the GTA area, the Golden Horseshoe. And he came to this conclusion for a number of reasons. Well, one of his big reasons, he'd gone to the Olympics, and he realized there was a disproportionately small number of Ontario athletes at the Olympics and on the Olympic teams. And when you studied this deeper, he found out that this was about a lack of facilities, coaching, and programs to work with our young people in this highly competitive world of high competition sports. And he felt, with the help of others in this room, that he could draw attention to that. And so he asked me to chair a bid in 2009, and with other people in this room, we spent a year. And I swear, as Shelley's here, that I was every weekend in planes going to South America trying to persuade these 42 countries to vote for us so we could have the games here because it was highly, highly competitive with 2 other cities. And I remind you, that bid cost $10 million to win it. But the vision articulated by the government of the day was threefold. Number one is to boost the economy and create jobs, and I'll come back to all this. Number two, and perhaps more importantly, was to leave a physical legacy of facilities, of infrastructure that our young people could use and that our communities could use, because this is beyond just high-performance athletes. And three, there was a more, shall we say, ethereal ambition to motivate our young people, to enhance our performance in international competition, and harness the power of sport to build on the very best in our communities. I have seen many forces in my life and in public life, but I don't think anything is as powerful as the power of sport to elevate our young people. There's not a mom and a dad in this room that doesn't go to an arena, that doesn't encourage their kids to run, to jump, to swim. It brings families together, and it brings out the best in our young people. I used to say that the measure of success for the Pan Ams would be if every single 11-year-old went to their mom and said, "Take me to the Pan Ams." I'm not saying we got them all, but we got most of them. And they were transformed by this experience. But that was the vision by the government of the day. But let me just recognize also that not everybody shared that vision. There were many, many, many vociferous critics. And they saw nothing but debt and cost overruns and excessive spending. They saw traffic jams and chaos. Some saw an event that would not be worthwhile, and others beneath us was not the Olympics, was only the Pan Ams, because it is a sub-brand of the Olympics. Some saw apathy and empty seats at all the venues. Some saw headaches for the government, especially in a minority legislature. Some saw security problems, and you read all about this. You saw how exaggerated all these people, in the absence of facts, put forward. Saw security problems similar to the G20, and then they saw venues that were late and games that were not ready on time. Well, you've got to give the critics some credit. They were wrong about everything, but they were very thorough. So let me talk right now about the financial history of these games, because I was there at the beginning. After the bid was won, the governments cut in 2009, the governments cut $300 million off the original budget. That was the budget, save for an enhancement of $74 million, that we went into the games with 6 years later. You can't find anything in public life, let alone private life, that can live with a budget that's 6 years old, particularly in terms of those capital expenditures. And I want to say the organizing team and the founding chairman then, Roger Garland, and the founding CEO, Ian Troop, did a very good job of sticking to that vision. And don't forget another management challenge here. Nobody had heard of the brand. Nobody wanted the games. You had one volunteer and one guy, and they had to build an organization to produce the biggest sports event in the history of Canada, hire the staff, put it all together, and the games are over and they all disappear, never to be seen again. You think of that in terms of a management challenge, in terms of managing 10,000 athletes, selling all of the tickets, selling out 31 venues. It was an extraordinary feat. So here we are, 1 month after the games, and let me tell you about the financial history, because there have been many, many critics, and this is very important to understand these facts. We've already established that the capital surplus on these games was $57 million, under budget. That's old news. I'm here to tell you today that there's a new contingency, a contingency on capital of at least another $10 million going on top of that. And I will tell you today that there will be an operating surplus of tens of millions of dollars. Tens of millions of dollars under budget, call it a surplus, some call it a profit. That's the way these games were run. And let me tell you, it's a credit to a great number of people. But this guy right here, Saad Rafi, came in here a couple of years ago and has done an outstanding job managing for value, getting every last penny's worth of value out of these games, and doing a brilliant job. And let me just say, there's a number of his senior leadership team right here. I think they should stand up because this is a leadership team I would go to war with any time, anywhere. An enormously competent person. And if my numbers are wrong, it's Barb Anderson's fault, so don't worry about me. Okay, I just like that. But let me just give you an example. I just want to give you an example of the kinds of things that Saad had to deal with. We had this was the largest games in Canadian history. 10,000 athletes and officials, 31 venues. Did it with roughly 1,000 paid staff. The Winter Olympics had about 3,000 athletes and officials, 1/3 the size, with 4,000 paid staff. So how can you do that? You do that with extraordinary management, and you also do it with 23,000 of the most dedicated volunteers you've ever seen in your life. And let me just say, it was done cooperatively. This was unique in Canadian history. This was a cooperation of 4 levels of government. The First Nations were deeply involved. Brian Laforme, through the Mississaugas of the New Credit, were our partners throughout. We were on their traditional lands. They were included in everything, and they were wonderful partners. And I think we helped create a new dialogue going forward in the future. We had the federal government. The federal government was a contributor here, and Balgazal, the minister, was enormously helpful and always standing up for our causes and did a wonderful job. Our minister, Michael Couteau, and really the primary responsibility was the provincial government, carried that can with aplomb and courage and grace, even though when he was being criticized. And then the municipal governments, there were 14 municipalities involved in all of this, principally Toronto, but Hamilton and a variety of others. And I say to Norm Kelly, who has always been a supporter, thank you, and thank the city, and thank the mayor for all you have done to make this a stunning success. This was a model of cooperation. Not bad to remind these guys during this election. Occasionally we can get along. And let me tell you as well, corporate Canada stepped up with aplomb. Monica's here from CIBC. CIBC was the principal sponsor, and they did a wonderful job and were there all the way. We raised $169 million in sponsorships from about 80 sponsors. That is the largest sponsorship program in Canada outside of the Olympics. And the greatest sponsorship in Pan Am history. So you can see that Canadians stepped up. Let me just talk briefly about the visions and carrying out the visions. Not only did the Games deliver a surplus, but we delivered on the vision. The government estimated 26,000 jobs were created, add about 3.7 to the GNP. And in spite of the fact that if you search the press, you will say somebody go around and find a business whose business was off during the Games, because you heard all of that. That is factually untrue. I'm not saying there aren't the odd exception to what I'm saying, but Moneris, the only objective arbiter and who studied this, said that business was up 7.7% in the downtown core as a result of the Games, and international spending was up almost 19%. In other words, the Games were good for business. I read this morning in the Hotelier magazine, and it said The Pan Am Games, this was just this morning, across GTA, left hoteliers beaming, and it was the best summer they have ever had. So there wasn't just one winner in all of this. Everybody was a winner. So let me talk about the legacy, which is a very, very big part of these games. I told you we had wonderful partners throughout these games, and the legacy is spread throughout the entire GTA. There's a brand new track at York University where you saw the opening of the Parapans, and you saw Ordrede la Pléiade run there, and it is, shall I say, to die for. Permanent to the York University. A new stadium in Hamilton that's helped revitalize Hamilton, and people there, they tell me, are very, very proud of it. A new velodrome in Milton. Very few people have ever ridden in a velodrome. I have. It is a thrill of a lifetime, let me tell you. But that will now center the cycling team. And it's not just a velodrome. It is a community center with enormously great leadership by Coady International, the mayor there, who took the risk to put that into his community. There's a new aquatic center in Scarborough that wouldn't be there if it wasn't for David Naylor, who's the president of the University of Toronto at the time. This is an aquatic center, if you have not seen it, as good as anything in the world. As anything in the world. The critics are raving about this. But what's interesting about this model is governance is tripartite. The University of Toronto, the community of Scarborough, and the high-performance athletes. So the dream was then, and it is now, you can have Michael Phelps in one pool and a little kid from the community in the next pool, and they all interface. And it's working fabulously, and everybody is happy with the way it's serving everybody. There's a new pool and sports center in Markham, and it's already been deeply embraced by that community. Now, in addition to all these facilities, in the budget, accrued for and put away, is $70 million for legacy. In other words, that money will go for maintenance of these facilities for the longer term, for at least 10 or 15 years. So in other words, we have provided not just the governance, but the funding of these assets for the years to come. And I think you will find them all serving the communities well, and I can assure you there will be no orphan assets. In addition to that, we've negotiated high-performance athletes for new and upgraded venues. That means 20 new national and provincial sports organizations have new homes. There's the Caledon Equestrian Park, and the dream was there to build something equivalent to Spruce Meadows in Calgary. This is Spruce Meadows East, in a sense that if you ask anybody in the agricultural business, is a great boon to that part of the world. There's Centennial Park at BMX Centre, there's the Minden Wild World Preserve, the Ajax Pan Am Ballpark, just to name a few of the new facilities. And that leads to something where we have new competitive advantage going forward in the world, and that is in the area of sports tourism. Sports tourism is a billion-dollar business around the world. And already, we are participating in that because of these new facilities. Welland is hosting the World Dragon Boat Racing Championships. That brings 4,000 people to Welland from 20 different countries. You can imagine the economic impact on a community like Welland. Markham, they're competing for the Yonex Canadian Open in the coming years, the largest international badminton event, I'm told, in the world. Milton will now host the Canadian Track Cycling Championships. And the Table Tennis Canada is just competing for the North American Olympic qualifiers. In other words, all of these communities, all of these facilities will go on to serve the sport, the community, and the local economy. And there's one other advantage from these games. They tend to drive, by a date certain, a lot of other development, things that have to be done. We take no credit for the Union Pearson Express. That was going to be built anyway. But the odds are it would have been another 2 or 3 years. And you take the GO services and a lot of other things and cleaning up the roads and facilities. It becomes a planning focus for things have to be done. And so the ancillary benefits of having games like this provide a catalyst for the private sector and the public sector to make things happen, things that tend to fall off the table by a certain date. Let me talk about probably the biggest legacy, and that is the village. And I'm very happy my good friend John Campbell is here from Waterfront Toronto, who had so much to do with this. This is the Marquee Athletes Village. I don't know if you've been there. I invite you to go down. It's just beside the Distillery District. This was a derelict piece of land called a territory. It was industrial wasteland, and I know about this because when I was in public life, I actually bought it. Let me just say, it was just a brilliant decision. I'm about 30 years off in terms of time, but it's turned out to be a stunning new area of this town. It has had the critics raving about it as a community and architecturally and every other way, and development of the West Islands. What does it have there? It has a student residence for George Brown. It has, I think, the biggest YMCA, John, am I right, in the city, a fabulous new facility. It's got a First Nations wellness center. It's got new condos, and I'm told that 76% of those condos are sold. I think my figure is right on that. It's got sustainable housing, affordable housing. So it's a modern new community, right walkable to the downtown of this city, just down Front Street. It is absolutely stunning, and you see families raising children, you see seniors raising active lives, you see lively public spaces and new parks, all as a result of this development, as a result of these games. Now, all this costs money, right? And it does. But I can tell you that the property owned by the province in that area now has already gone up in value something like $200 million. So there is a yield on these kind of expenditures. And my friends tell me that the tax revenue based on not just that development, but all the development around it, and it is the hottest area in town right now, will raise hundreds of millions of dollars for the public purse, federal, provincial, and the community. So you can see that these kind of games provide momentum and acceleration to things you need to do and want to do. Well, let me take you to the third vision. And that was, shall we say, the elevation of the human soul. That was the inspiration. That was a harder thing to prove and a harder thing to grasp. But this is something my dear friend Marcel Aubu understands very well as president of the Canadian Olympic Committee. He put his full energy into these games. He provided the best athletes in this country. They came with pride. They were all happy to wear the Canadian sweater. And they won 217 medals, a record. And it wasn't... I would say to you, we can talk about buildings and we can talk about money and we can talk about investment, but until this all comes alive with the human narratives, with the stories of those wonderful athletes, who'd ever heard of Ordrede la Pléiade or Ellie Black, or these kids that are so absolutely wonderful, and they take over, they tug at our heartstrings, and we share their stories and we share their history, and your kids look at it and do the same. And that maybe is the most important thing we do. And they had a remarkable leader, the Canadian team. This guy, I think, is in the room. Kurt Harnett. Where is Kurt? I love him. I love Kurt Harnett. It's not just because of his hair. It's just because he carried these games with his enthusiasm, his energy, and of course he's one of the greatest athletes Canada has ever produced. But he brought soul and dimension to these games that very few can. And then the volunteers. I've mentioned them, but 23,000. There wasn't a miserable experience. There wasn't one bad thing. You'd think something bad would happen. Nothing bad happened. Every single one of these kids will tell you that was the greatest experience of their life. They weren't kids, actually. They were all sizes, all age, all colors, all sexes, all religions, everything you could possibly have, all mixed together, all working together, meeting people that they had never met before, working in sports they never even heard of before, all feeling good because they were making the world a little bit better place. I'm going to tell you a story that means something to me. Rosie McLellan, who many of you people have heard of now, but I hadn't heard of. When I was Chancellor at the University of Toronto working with David Naylor, I was at an athletic event. There's a little kid standing there, and I went over and shook her hand, and I said, hi. And I said, I'm David Peterson, the Chancellor. She said, well, I'm Rosie McLellan. And I said, what do you do? And she said, well, I'm actually on the trampoline team. I said, for U of T? No. She said, well, I'm actually going to the Olympics. I'd never heard of her, and I wasn't even sure trampoline was in the Olympics, but I took it at face value. And I had a lovely chat with her. She's just an absolutely outstanding young woman. She phoned me about a month later. She said, are you the guy I met at the University of Toronto? I said, I think I am. And she said, I'm doing a fundraiser. My friend Sarah Gardner and I are doing a fundraiser for University of Toronto because they're raising money for the Golding Centre. And we would like you to come on a Friday night. We're inviting our friends and family to this fundraiser. So I said, yeah, okay, Rosie, I'll come. So I went and made a little speech. And she stood up and made a little speech. Now, she was just on her way to the Olympics. Nobody had ever heard of her. She stood up and said, I just wanted to thank University of Toronto for all they've done for me. Thank my mom and my dad who drove me to all these lessons and practices all my life, who went to all these tournaments all over the place with me and gave their life and their coaches that did this for me, this little athlete, and her friend. And they raised $20,000 that night and gave it to the University of Toronto. A month later, she was off to the Olympics and our oldie gold medalist in London. This is the kind of character we're building in these young people. And I think it is an investment that we should all be proud of. And there's something else we did in elevating the human soul. We shone the light of the world on Toronto and the things that we believe. We have a unique brand in this country, the brand of inclusiveness, the brand of sharing, and the brand of diversity. We do it better than anybody else in the world, and the world understands that. And by God, the world needs it right now. So it's a good thing that we were able to move the yardsticks a bit in that area as well. So just in response to the critics, I just want to say there was no debt or cost overruns. There was no gridlock. There were some issues here and there in moving traffic, but I think the traffic planners will tell you they learned an awful lot from this experience and they'll use that lessons going forward. Sure, people adjusted their plans. Go ridership was over 25%, but then it worked very well, and there's no question we have issues to solve in that regard going forward. These games were not a small, unworthy event. They were performed at Olympic caliber. All of the experts coming in from around the world said these games are to Olympic standards. You look at the 31 venues that Alan Vanson had to run, 31 venues across this province, from Minden to Welland. The look, the feel, the security, everything worked fabulously. Over 1 million tickets were sold. Over 1 million tickets, biggest event ever. And people responded with enthusiasm and generosity. Attendance at the various events was over 2.25 million. I'm talking about Pan American, I'm talking about all of the cultural events. There are 35 days of animation of culture at Nathan Phillips Square, at Pan Am Park, and the Distillery District, and other areas. And you saw the best of Canadian artists. And you saw us showing our soul to the world. And so you can say that it was a great success. And those that predicted security problems, let me just say, there wasn't one security problem. There was. No, that's not true. Before the game started, somebody found a little hole in the fence, and it took 4 days of media to find that little hole in the fence, and have blown into epic proportions. Other than that, not one security problem. And if you're at the Games, you just look at the behavior of our police forces, the municipal force. They were part of the face of Toronto. They did a fabulous job. They were happy. They were part of it. They were friendly guides. That's policing at its best. They were not standing there just being fierce and scaring people. They were part of the face of this great country that puts forward and welcomes the world to our country in a safe way. And I think Chief Saunders and others deserve a great deal of credit for what they have done. So ladies and gentlemen, let me just conclude by addressing the elephant in the room, which is the Olympic bid. Should we or shouldn't we? I can tell you this is an extremely controversial subject. I've never seen a subject outside of some political debates and some religious debates that garners more strong opinions. Some of it informed, some of it are not. And this is not a debate the mayor asked for. This just came about because the Pan Am Games were such a success. I remind you, it's already been turned down once, but now there's this head of steam coming on saying, good God, we were good at this. Should we go ahead and take it up a notch for the Olympics? And let me tell you, this is fraught with horrible politics. You can imagine the mayor and the council, Norm, you're listening to this, has to make a decision on this in the next 5 days, at least to open the door. You understand that they face an election in about 3 years, and the anti-voices will be very, very loud in 3 years, what could come along to derail the vision. And you understand that the vast majority of them will not be here in 2024 to enjoy the fruits of that. Norm Kelly will, nobody else will be here. So he's been here since 1904, so he's going to be here. I was in student politics with Norm Kelly at Western. I'm not going to tell you when, but a long time ago. But it's a question that elicits very, very, very strong opinions. And you ask, and for some reason, Montreal is indelibly seared into people's minds. Montreal was 1976, but everybody remembers the deficit in the Dome and used that as an example of public spending. And they don't remember Vancouver, that came in on time and under budget. Calgary was a great, stunning success. These Pan Ams, which are bigger than all of them, were an outstanding success. So if you want to find negative examples, you can use Sochi, or you can use Montreal. But do not be burdened by the past in your thinking on these things. I can tell you it is much, much easier politically not to bid on these games. There's an old adage that Norm Kelly understands: dogs don't bark at parked cars. But if the political leadership decides to go ahead, there are 2 points I'd like to make that I'd like to share with them. The Olympics is not an end in itself. It is only a means to an end. And the mayor is absolutely right to ask the most important questions. Will it help people? Will it benefit people? Will it build a better city? Will it advance our agenda, transportation? And that's probably our biggest and most complex problem in the city. Will it advance waterfront development? Will it advance housing? Will it detract or reduce resources that we should be committed to other areas? Will it bring people together? And will it advance our human objectives in this city? Those are the right questions to ask, and they have to satisfy themselves. And if the Olympic bid and achieving the Olympics does not achieve those ends, it is not worth doing. Number 2, the only advice I would give is you need a big vision to pull off something like the Pan Ams or the Olympics. And you have to believe in it passionately, because I can tell you there will be bumps in the road, and there will be rough spots, and there'll be lots of critics. everyone will ask the question how it advances their own agenda. And the Olympic bid has to win over that person who's looking out their front window at a pothole and say, how will an Olympic bid fill my pothole? Or how will it ease congestion? And how will Olympics drive the change that people want? And then, of course, you have to go to the question, can we afford it? And the cost of Olympics depends on the size of the vision. You can have a very narrow vision, and you can have a broader vision if you want to use the Olympics to accomplish a lot of other social and planning purposes. But that has to be articulated by our political leadership with the visions they have and the future that they have for this great city. I want to make one important point that's rarely made and I think rarely understood. Anytime you hear a figure for the Games, you will hear a figure that sounds like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money, whatever that figure is. But this cost would be spread over 7 years. It's not a one-off expenditure in 1 year. That cost would be shared with the private sector because it attracts huge investment, as well as the federal, provincial, and municipal governments. So if you take that cost, whatever it is, as a percentage of the total infrastructure budgets, you will find it is not a significant figure. That is often lost in the debate on the costs of these kinds of games. Well, what are the odds of winning? 5 days to decide. Mayor and council have to make the decision. At least they have to open the door. They have to send a letter to the IOC with the signature of the president of the COC, Marcel, who's here, as well as the mayor, John Tory, saying we want to open the door, as well as a $150,000 deposit. Then the work starts, if they decide to open that door. They can always close that door. They can always close it if they come to the conclusion that they can't pull off the vision, or if they don't have the vision. But people tell me in the know, and we had many, many international visitors here this summer, because of that we have a very, very favorable position to win. Because of the stunning success of the Pan Ams, the venues, the wonderful organization, the volunteers, the outstanding response from the communities, the unparalleled cooperation of all levels of government. Many facilities in the Pan Ams can be used for the Olympics. Don't get the impression you have to build all new stuff. You don't, because we have a lot of great facilities. We have the best time zone. The Eastern Standard is the best commercial time zone in the world to stage games. And it is probably, although this is not an absolute rule, North America's turn to host the games. And Canada's brand is very, very, very welcomed in the world, because we represent the best of the world, and everybody knows that the world needs more of Canada, not less of Canada. Let me tell you the greatest compliment I got on these games. I was walking out of the opening ceremony, and I hope some of you saw it on television who were there, and I walked out with a chief from Quebec. He was French-speaking, he was an Aboriginal chief, and we walked out together. I said, Chief, what'd you think of it? He said, that was a beautiful story, beautiful, beautiful ceremony. I said, why? He said, because you told everybody's story. Think about it. We told everybody's story. Everybody felt included in that event, and I think in the entire Games. So let me not be naive in conclusion. This is not without huge risks. You could easily lose. Criticism could drown out all the other positive aspects because the negative noises tend to be louder than the positive noises. We live in a free and democratic society, and everybody has a right to their point of view. And bad things can happen, especially if you're looking for them. And I can tell you there is no guarantees. And the question is it worth the risk? Well, in conclusion, let me just say the mayor and the council will make a decision in the next few days. I do know this about life, and this is my own personal conclusion, that it's a lot easier to do nothing than it is to do something. There are no critics if you're doing nothing. But I do know that cities, provinces, countries, as with individuals, are better when they aspire, when they have big dreams, and when they reach. And we in Canada are good at dreaming, planning, building, and executing ambitious ideas. We have proven that. It will be up to the people of this region to decide where this new, renewed confidence can take us. The 2015 Games may be over, but the impact, the legacy, and the transformation are really just beginning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Peterson. And I think we have a time for maybe 2 questions before our television time runs out. Would you be up to taking a couple of questions? Great. Let's open it up.
Premier Peterson, thank you for the comments. And again, congratulations to you and the team who are all here on a fantastic, fantastic Pan Am Games. Really enjoyed it. The elephant in the room is indeed the Olympics. We all know the bid is due next week. And building on the momentum we have right now, and I guess what you're suggesting is we need to sort of strike now, in a sense, while the iron is hot. We've got great facilities, momentum, brand, etc. What exactly is the holdup with writing a check for $150,000 to open that door next week? And what role are you playing with the experience you have now to persuade the council and the mayor of the fact we should be pursuing this great ambition and vision and, you know, making it a reality in 2024?
Senator, what am I doing? Look, I consider I've given blood, but then I have lots more blood to give, which isn't, it's obvious from my remarks. I think we should reach for this, personally. I have no influence on this decision whatsoever, and I do think I understand the politics from the point of view of the mayor and the council. But I can tell you there are a lot of critics out there. I read it all, and some highly uninformed and influential critics out there that will come to bring their points to view, as they have every right to do. I'm not trying to shut off discussion. My own opinion is there is no official group right now. There's no organizing committee. Marcel has been very vocal about, and he understands the international politics of the sportsmen better than anybody in this country, and he has many, many friends. He lives in Quebec City, not in Toronto. He speaks for the Canadian athletes and has done a great job with the Olympic Committee. But he can't speak for Toronto. Toronto has to speak for itself, and that's through the voice of the mayor with the help of the other levels of government. I think if you think it is worthwhile, and you ask Norm Kelly, this is not easy. He'll be hearing both sides of this, as I would assume. And some people feel passionately the other way about it. I think if you feel it's worthwhile, fire off an email to the mayor and say, look, Mayor, I understand you have a tough decision to make. If you decide to do it, I'm there with you. And by the way, if the Olympics come along, it will involve thousands of people, not just a few. This isn't an elite enterprise. This isn't an elite undertaking. It's going to involve all the corporate leadership. It's going to involve the social leadership, all the sports leadership, the mums and dads, and eventually that 11-year-old kid who tells their mom, take me to the Olympics, and I'm going to get up early and I'm going to work a little harder today so I can run in that race. That's what mums and dads, at least that's what guys like me when I was a dad like to hear, you know? So this is for all of us. It's not for just a few of us. Any other?
We're good? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Peterson. And here to offer our appreciation is my board colleague, Jeff Wilson.
Well, I have the great pleasure of, on behalf of the Empire Club of Canada and everyone here, friends and colleagues in the room today, of offering thanks for David Peterson's speech today. But it occurs to me in listening and in watching your reaction that thank you for a speaker for coming and giving us a wonderful speech today is really not what I would like to do. What I'd really like to do is thank Mr. Peterson for making us feel pretty special to be in Toronto. Toronto has arrived. And for the wonderful team that he very freely and generously also points out in this room. I'd actually like Saad Rafi and his team right here to stand up for a second. Mr. Peterson. We were a proud sponsor of the Pan Am Games, Ports Toronto was, and when the Games are a success, every sponsor feels special, and that was special to me in a personal way as well. And I think that as one of thousands of people that attended this sporting event, and I'm sure many of you did as well, you caught the spirit and you caught the excitement of the moment. This was a very impressive undertaking that this team put together, that Mr. Peterson led. I'm grateful for your coming today, David, and giving us this insight and telling the story. The Games captured our imaginations. The Games really, truly made us feel fortunate here in Toronto. It really made us feel like this city has arrived on a global stage, and that's really important. And the Games are over now, but we're going to continue to benefit from the infrastructure, from the goodwill, and from all of the generated excitement, enthusiasm, and energy that the Games have put together. So on behalf of the board of the Economic Club of Canada, thank you all for coming, and a very special thank you to Mr. David Peterson. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you very much to Ports Toronto as well for sponsoring our event today, and thank you, Mr. Peterson, again for a wonderful season opener, and I must say that Gandhi, Churchill, and Peterson is starting to have a certain ring to it. I don't know. We'd also like to thank the National Post and our other print sponsors, as well as Rogers Cable, our television sponsor. Please follow us on Twitter at Empire_Club, and visit us online at empireclub.org, or you can follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. We'd also like you to join us in the coming weeks. We've got an incredible season lined up. Starting next week, we'll have Omar Kadar's lawyer talking about, obviously, from his and his client's perspective, the long and torturous route to justice, as well as we have Rachel Notley coming in to do her first out-of-Alberta major address to Canadians here on October 2nd. She'll be followed 3 days later by our own Premier, Kathleen Wynne, who is going to come to join us. And in a few weeks' time, we've got the Governor of the Bank of Canada. So please join us again this season. It's going to be a great and very rich season. Thank you for coming to our season opener. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.